Today we're going to be learning Moed Katan Daf Kaf. Today's dedication, not an easy one to read, but today's learning is dedicated to myself by the thousands of students around the world in honor of my birthday. Bat Chamishim le'etza. In Masechet Shabbat, you taught us that Melata alaveshayu yakira. Fine wool is precious to she who wears it. That is, a student loves the teachings of her teacher. Rabbanit Michelle, we are honored and lucky to learn from you daily. We treasure and love all of your teaching. May we grow in learning with you from year to year for many more years to come. Happy birthday. Thank you, everybody. Okay, and Chodesh Tov to everyone. Good day to have a birthday. We have one more day, but we're at least close. We have 2 months of that this year. So here goes our daf. Okay, we're going to start from the end of yesterday's daf, which is Ba'amine Abai mi Rabba. 6 lines from the bottom, Abai asked Rabba the following question. If you bury someone on the holiday, okay, we're getting into all these laws that unfortunately happen a lot, which is either someone dies on the holiday or they die before the holiday, what happens? So now we're on a question, if someone dies on the holiday, and we know that you don't do Shiva, you push off Shiva until after. The Shiva starts after the holiday. But what about, and we're going to see some interesting things about this, that again, we'll see this a bunch of times, practices that happen then that no longer happen, and we'll have to discuss what happened there exactly. Why don't we do this anymore? But what happens is, and I won't have answers to all of them, but you bury them on the regel, so you push off counting Shiva, but maybe you count them as days of your shloshim. And why did the Gemara say that? I'm not going to read the whole thing inside because we saw it in yesterday's daf, which is, you already on the same laws apply. Avelut, you can't do all the things of Avel when you're in a regel. We already learned that. But like not wearing shoes and sitting on the floor, that's not appropriate for holiday. But not cutting your hair, you can't do that on the holiday anyway, right? And some people didn't do laundry either for the 30 days. Hard to imagine. But certain things of Avelut, or no, of the shloshim, are, the main things we don't do on the holiday anyway. So shouldn't you be able to count them as shloshim? So Rabbi says, no, you don't count them as shloshim. Okay, those days don't count. Everything starts after. You start the Shiva after, and after the Shiva, right, or you start counting the shloshim from the day after the holiday, not the day from the burial. To which Abai starts to question Rabbi. And he says, number one, I'm going to quote you from this source, and we're going to start reading from here. Eitive, 3 lines from the bottom. The first case is not relevant to our purposes, but we're going to get a little distracted because we're going to learn some things in here that are very interesting and also don't match what we do today. But the real case we're looking for is the second case. There's 2 cases in the Braita. One is someone dies before the holiday, but not 3 days before. As you remember, we saw in the Mishnah, it has to be the person died you already had 3 days of Shiva in order for the holiday to cancel. Today, we'll finally see the opinion that is what we go by today, which is even 1 hour of Shiva is sufficient. But right now, we're assuming we're in the other approach. We're going to have that case. And then we're going to have the case that we're really looking for, which is if somebody dies during the holiday. Okay, so the first case really isn't relevant, but it's part of the Braita, so we're learning it. You bury someone 2 days before the holiday. Remember, the regal doesn't cancel it. Holiday doesn't cancel. So you count. You basically, it's like doing pause. You pause 7 days later, or however long the holiday is. You then continue your 5 days that you still have left. In those days of Shiva, what happens, right? Your work gets done by other people. So your servants can do things quietly in your house so nobody notices them, right? Not publicly. Here's the big line. This isn't relevant for the sugya, but it's a fascinating line. But on those 5 days after, nobody pays Shiva visits because they already paid Shiva visits during the week of the regal. Fascinating, right? We don't do this nowadays. First of all, we don't do this at all anyway, because we don't have this concept that 2 days and then, right, that you have a break in the middle of Shiva of a holiday. But we'll see in the next case where it happens during the holiday, they say the same thing, which is if someone dies during the holiday, then, or let's say someone died and the Shiva broke, right? The regal broke the Shiva. Theoretically, it sounds like here people would still visit during the holiday. People would pay Shiva visits. Okay, so therefore, what they're saying is because people paid Shiva visits during the holiday, there's the obligation. It's very interesting. It's kind of like a spotlight on the Avel, the person, the mourner. For them, there's no Avelut, right? All the laws of Avelut go out the window. Spotlight on the community, community goes to visit for 7 days, whether there's a holiday, whether there's not a holiday. So I was very pleased to see that Gefet this week, Rabbanit Yael Shimoni, chose to talk about this topic because it's a fascinating topic. And I recommend everybody listen. And she basically brings different approaches to this idea of why do people pay Shiva visits during the holiday, right? When theoretically, we don't do this nowadays. And she even suggests that maybe one should do it. And one of the things she mentions, I'll just mention one opinion that she brings, but I really recommend you listen. It'll be up later today, which is this idea. I just want to remind you that Gefet used to be only in Hebrew. Now it's Hebrew and English. So you can listen in any language that you want. It's an excellent way to get an idea of what it's like to learn a very short shiur of in-depth learning from Yeshivat Drisha. What she talks about is this idea that visiting someone when you're sitting Shiva is, what's the whole idea of Avelut and Regel? And it actually connects nicely with the previous weeks, which was all what she spoke in the previous week was about this idea of Avelut overriding the Regel, and this idea about, it's not what we usually think about, happiness and sadness, and that the two can't go. There's some other reasons why you don't have Avelut in the Regel. But in any case, she says that the concept, even if you stick with that concept of we're supposed to be happy on the holiday, there's the laws of Avelut. When I said spotlight on the people and spotlight on the individual. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is that Avelut, laws of Avelut, like not wearing shoes and all that, that's to be sad. That's not appropriate on the holiday, sit on the floor. But visiting makes people happy. The whole idea is to console the people, and that would be appropriate to do on a holiday. So it's very interesting because we don't do this anymore. And what she pointed out was a good point about how nowadays, not even nowadays, in any case, when someone ends up with almost no Shiva, because they had an hour of Shiva before and then all of it's canceled, that maybe there's this idea that we should reinstate the Shiva visits on the holiday because the person ends up with really no Shiva. So anyway, it's a very interesting idea. I recommend you listen to the Shiur. Klalo shel davar, the rule of thumb is, kol shehu mishum evel, regel mafsiko. If it has to do with the mourner, here's we'll go with the spotlight on the mourner, no Shiva. The chol shehu mishum iskei rabim, but if it has to do with what the responsibility of the people toward the mourner, ein regel mafsiko. The regel doesn't nullify that. That's the first case. Again, I told you that has nothing to do with us. Right now, we're on the next case, which has a lot to do with us. And you'll see in a minute why they had to bring the beginning part. That's our case. Someone gets buried, doesn't really matter how many days before, but they get buried on the holiday. In this case, the example they bring, 3 days before the end of the holiday. All of Shiva happens after the Regel, however, with one minor difference. The first 4 days of the Shiva, people come visit. But the last 3 days, they don't need to. Why? Because they already paid Shiva visits on the holiday. This shows you that even if someone were to die on the holiday, people can come pay Shiva visits on the holiday. Again, we don't do this at all today. But according to the Braita, this is what they did. So that's case number 2. So the Braita so far has case number 1, which is not our case, 2 days, and then 5 at the end. Case number 2 is someone dies on the Regel. Now, what are we looking for? We want to know, do you count, who can remember our original question, do you count these days for shloshim? Okay, in the case that someone died, so here the person died 3 days before the end of the holiday, do those days count as shloshim? So what are the next words in the Braita? And the last words? Veregel olelo. And the Regel counts for him. Now, what does it count for him? It doesn't count for him as Shiva. We just said you count Shiva after. So it must be the Regel counts for shloshim. So there you have it. It's explicitly against what Rabba said. Rabba said it doesn't count for shloshim. So the Gemara says, my lava seifa, is that those 3 words, aren't they referring to the case they were just discussing? So the Gemara says, and then it would contradict Rabba. So Rabba, this was Abaye question, not the Gemara. Abaye questions Rabba. Lo aresha. Abaye says, Rabba says, no. You can, again, what's the structure? Now you know why we had to bring the beginning of the Braita. Case number 1, 2 days before the Regel, somebody dies. Case number 2, someone dies in the middle of the Regel. Third line, third sentence of the thing, Regel olelo. Regel olelo is actually referring to case number 1, which means that if you started 2 days before and the Regel came, the holiday came and broke up your Shiva, but it's true it broke up your Shiva and your Shiva gets pushed up, but since you already started sitting Shiva, those intermediary days of the holiday or those, in the middle of your Shiva count as days for your Shloshim. In which case, if you say that line is referring to line number 1, then it doesn't really make a difference, right? Then we're done. Then this source raises no question on Rabbah because it wasn't talking about the case that Rabbah was talking about. So that's his answer. However, Abai is going to bring another source that seems to clearly contradict Rabbah, and we're going to be left with a question. So that one we could somehow explain, even though it's maybe not the best explanation or most convincing explanation, because it should have then said it after line number, right? There's line number 1, line number 2, line number 3. Line number 3, to go back to line number 1, it's a little bit of a stretch, but it does happen. So, in many cases, so it's okay. But this source, we're not going to have an answer for. Eitive. Eitive, again, means we're bringing Braita or some sort of Tanaitic source that's going to contradict an Amora, which is a good time to remind everyone that in a week, we're starting a new skills class to teach you all these kind of things. So if you want to join, it's starting on Sunday. I'll be teaching it. Eitive. Regel olelo l'minyan shloshim. The holiday, here you see, the holiday counts as part of the shloshim. Ketzad, what would be the case? And here we're going to see explicitly the case that Rabbah talked about, where Rabbah said, no, it doesn't. And here it says it clearly does. Kvaro b'tchilat haregel, if you buried someone in the beginning of the holiday, moneh shiva achar haregel, you count 7 Shiva days after the holiday. Umelachto na'aseh yidei acherim, again, in those 7 days of Shiva, somebody else does your work for you, you can't work. Your servants can work quietly in your house, meaning not in where everybody sees them. But nobody comes, pays a Shiva visit according to this, because they already did. Bit regel olelo. Now here it says, and the regel counts as part of the shloshim. So clearly you can't say what we thought before about that regel olelo was talking about the other case. This is clearly talking about this case, in which case there's really a contradiction against Rabbah. And in fact, we're going to continue and see that there's different opinions. Rabbah is not the only one. We're going to see 2 people in Eretz Israel and Israel that held against Rabbah, that the shloshim actually, the regel, the holiday days, count as part of the shloshim if someone died within the holiday, and obviously before the holiday, in a case that the holiday didn't cancel the Shiva, all those days count as the shloshim. Ki'ata Ravin, when Ravin came from Eretz Israel, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, as he told the Babylonians, that Rabbi Yochanan said, Afilu kfaro beregel, even if you bury them on the regel. Now, he doesn't say the rest of the sentence, but obviously you count those days as shloshim. Okay, so again, it's weird because you usually think shloshim starts from Shiva, right, or from the burial, which is when the Shiva starts. In these cases, you're going to count the shloshim from the day of the burial, even though your Shiva is starting later. And chen orile Rabbi Elazar le Rabbi Pedat berei. Also, Rabbi Elazar taught Rabbi Pedat his son, same halacha, afilu kfaro beregel, those days count as shloshim. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're going to have another braita. Kiyem kfiyat hamita shlosha yamim. What we're finally going to get to now, because until now, all we've seen is if it's less than 3 days, then the holiday does not cancel the Shiva. Now, the Shiva. Now we're going to see our opinion that we do, which is even 1 hour of sitting Shiva, the regel cancels the Shiva. So first, we're going to see a different opinion, and we'll talk about the wording in a minute because the wording is a little bit strange. If you did the mitzvah of turning over the bed, or the requirement to turn over your bed, which you're supposed to do, which again is another thing that we no longer do. It also depended on the way their beds were. They would turn their beds upside down. But if I turn my bed upside down, it wouldn't really be useful at all. I wouldn't even be able to sleep on it, but forget about the fact that I don't even know how I would turn the whole thing upside down. But their beds were very different. We've learned about their beds, remember, with the putting the ropes in and things like that. So you can easily just turn over the bed. It was a sign of mourning. If you did that for 3 days before the regel, then you would not need to do that after the regel. That basically, in other words, is saying if you observed mourning laws, some people say, why kfiyat hamita? Because it's like the least of all of them. And it's saying, even if that's the only one you did, and let's say you didn't take off your shoes, you didn't sit on the floor, but all you did was kfiyat hamita, that's enough to say, okay, as long as you did some Shiva, you don't have to worry about it. This has 2 ramifications, okay, his wording. Okay, again, the main thing he's trying to say is you need 3 days worth of Shiva. but it's not enough that the person died within 3 days of the holiday. It's that you have to actually sit Shiva. So I'll give you a few examples. Nowadays, we do it immediately, right? As long as you had some sort of sitting Shiva, then it's canceled. Let's say you got back from the cemetery and you didn't sit Shiva yet. You didn't have time and already the holiday started. Then it wouldn't, based on what he's saying, right? He's saying two things. Number one, you need minimum 3 days, but even it's saying it's not just the days. It's not just the time passes. It's that you had to have done some sort of Shiva. So that's number one thing that comes out of here, which is you have to be Nohei Dinei Shiva, something for it to have said, okay, that was my Shiva. If it's nothing, then it's as if the person died on the holiday. The second thing, the Raavad basically reads this as if we're penalizing him. It's not that you have to have some Shiva. If you didn't have Shiva, well, then it's as if the person died on the regel. And you could sit in the cemetery, yes. Some people do that. If there's not enough time, they sit in the cemetery to be, as we say, Yotze. This also, by the way, comes up. We hold Miktsat Yom Kikulo, part of the day. So anyone who buries someone close to the end of the day, they also sit at the cemetery so that day already counts as 1 day of Shiva. So the same laws apply here for counting days of Shiva. But the thing that I found really fascinating is that according to the Raavad's understanding, if you intentionally forget, like, okay, there wasn't enough time. But here, let's say I don't want to keep Shiva, okay? Or I don't want to do the mitzvot of Shiva. I'm not in the mood. I don't know, whatever reason. If I intentionally, or unwittingly, but if I intentionally, and it's either which way, then it doesn't count, even though 3 days had passed. The regel doesn't cancel, and I have to do Shiva after. And it's a way, he views it as a penalty, that we're penalizing you. It's not that the way we view it, okay, you have to have sat, otherwise how could the regel cancel it? It has to cancel, you have to have had some sort of Shiva. But what he's saying is more than that, is that if you decided not to do Dinei Shiva, then it's not canceled, basically. We're penalizing you, and then you're going to have to do a full week when the holiday ends. So it's interesting that he views this as kind of penalty. Anyway, the main thing about this is the 3 days. And comes the Chachamim, and we finally get to what we've been waiting for. Chachamim omrim, afilu yom echad va'afilu sha'a achat, even 1 day and even 1 hour of that day. Why? Because we say miktzat hayom kikulo. So as long as you've sat for 1 hour, that's sufficient. Okay, whether he means literally 60 minutes or a certain significant amount of time, which could be even less maybe, then the regel comes and cancels, and that's what we do. And now you're going to see in a minute why we do that. Among Rabbi Elazar bar Rabbi Shimon, hein divrei Beit Shammai, hein divrei Beit Hillel. By the way, this machloket of Rabbi Elazar and the rabbis was an older machloket, based on a machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. We always hold like Beit Hillel, and you'll see that Beit Hillel holds like the rabbis. Beit Shammai omrim shlosha yamim, they say 3 Beit Shammai. Beit Hillel omrim afilu yom echad, Beit Hillel say even 1 day. And not only machloket Beit Shammai Beit Hillel and machloket Rabbi Elazar and the rabbis, but if we go, and I'm specifically saying in that way, if we look chronologically, first we got a machloket Beit Shammai Beit Hillel there earlier, then, which again isn't Shammai and Hillel, it's their students. Then we have a machloket between Rabbi Elazar and the rabbis later. Then when we jump there later, Tanaim. Then when we jump to the time of the Amoraim, then we have also a debate about this, meaning this wasn't resolved in the time. You would have thought by Beit Hillel it would have been resolved. It wasn't resolved in Rabbi Elazar rabbis' times. It also wasn't even resolved in the Amoraim's time. Okay, obviously by now it's resolved. We all know the halacha, but it wasn't so clear then. Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So they passed down the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Amrei la. Some people say it was Amar Lahu Rabbi Yochanan, the Rabbi Chia bar Abba, the Rav Huna. That not that they passed it down in his name, but that he said to them, Afilu yom echad, afilu sha'a achat. So now we have one on the side of 1 day or even 1 hour. Rava Amar halacha katana didanda Amar shlosha. Rava says no. We hold like our Mishnah. What did our Mishnah say? Remember, 3 days. So we have someone now on the other side. Third, Ravina ikla l'sura de Prat came to the surah that was on the Euphrates, the city of there. Amar Rav Chaviva leRavina hilchetamai. Rav Chavina, when Ravina got there, Rav Chanina said to him, "What's the halacha? What do we do? 3 days, 1 day." Amar le afilu yom echad afilu sha'a achat. And he says, no, even 1 day, even 1 hour. So we end up. Right. And that's how we hold. Okay. But you see that even in the time of the Amoraim, it was still a debate. And interestingly, Rav Chaviva had to ask him, there was lack of clarity about it, which must mean that people were doing different customs. Okay. Like we see nowadays, there's so many different customs of Avelut. This happens not to be an issue we have different customs about, but we're going to see there's a lot of different customs in general, and you see it here too. Yativ Rabbi Chia bar Abba v'Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Yitzchak nafcha akila de Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar. So these rabbis were sitting in the entranceway of the house of the pavilion of Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar. Nafig milta beinayu. So a learning of Torah, a teaching came in between them, meaning this topic came up. Minayin la'avelut shiva. Okay, this is something we take for granted. Shiva. It's a week, right? How do we know that? Where do we get this from? 7 days. This is a great question. And it's something that's so obvious to us, but how do we know? So, this is a verse in Sefer Amos, one of the Treasar, the 12 books. And it says there, I will turn your holidays into days of mourning. So you see this parallel between holidays and mourning. How long are holidays? It's actually a good question. But the average holiday is 7 days. If you take, right, let's say the 3 regalim, 2 of them are 7 days. Actually, one is really 8 days. So again, it's a little tricky, but maybe Shmini Atzeret is we've learned Rega B'fnei Atzmo. And then you have Shavuot is 1 day. So they ignore Shavuot for right now. They say, Machag Shiva, Afavelut Shiva. Average holiday is 7 days. Ve'ema Atzeret Echad Yoma. Why don't you say, let's do it like Shavuot is 1 day. And we always learn, Tafasta Meruba lo Tafasta, right? Generally, Tafasta Mu'at Tafasta. If you have we've seen this before where they use this halachically. If you have an option to take something that's a lot and you have an option to take something that's less, better to take something that's less. So if you're going to say your chagim turn to Avel, and we're going to learn Chag Avelu, why don't we say Chag could be 1 day. So then Avelut maybe could be only 1 day. If a holiday could be 1 day, then mourning could be 1 day. So they say no. They need Chagechem referring to Shavuot for something else. And that's going to get us off on a whole tangent here, a tangent that's very relevant, but a tangent. You need this for what Rish Lakish says. Amar Rish Lakish mishum Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya, minayin l'shmu'a rechoka she'ena noheget ela yom echad. How do you know? Now we're going to learn what shmu'a rechoka. Shmu'a rechoka is I find out that someone who I'm supposed to sit shiva for, I find out they died, but already time has passed. I find out they were buried, right? Nowadays, it's less common, although it does happen. But in those days, imagine somebody lived far away till they got word of their death. It could take a very long time. So, or in the, right, Yafa and the Shoah could have happened, very common. So, right, it happened to my grandmother. She found out many years later that her parents had died in the Holocaust. She didn't know till much later. So, if that happens, you do only 1 day, and we're going to get to Kriya. We'll get to this question. This is going to take us on a tangent into all the laws of Shmu'a Rechoka. So now it says, how do we know it's only 1 day? We have Atzeret, Shavuot, which is 1 day, and yet it's called Chag. So we're basically going to split and say, 1 day, we're going to match up with Shmu'a Rechoka. If you heard from a long time ago that someone died, we'll see how long and all that soon. The other option, Chagechem Le'evel, in a normal manner, then we're going to treat it like the other holidays, which are 7 days. Tanu Rabbanan. So since we got onto this topic, we're now going to quote a braita that teaches us all about Shmu'a Rechoka, and we're going to see that there's actually a debate about this as well. Shocking. Tanu Rabbanan. Shmu'a Krova noheget shiva u'shloshim. If you hear soon, right, soon after, so you do shiva and shloshim. Shmu'a Rechoka ina noheget ele yom echad. So far, this matches what we saw, only 1 day. Ezohi krova ve'ezohi rechoka. So what's considered a normal hearing and what's considered already from a distance? Krova b'toch shloshim, within 30 days. Rechoka lachar shloshim. Now you can see this is probably very common. Over 30 days later, pretty common that someone might not have heard if they don't live near their family. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. Chachamim omrim chad shmu'a krova, chad shmu'a rechoka. Fascinating. This is the rabbis. Noheget shiva u'shloshim. They say it's all the same. Whenever you hear, it could be 5 years later, you sit Shiva, you sit Shloshim as if it just happened. Now, we don't do this. We're going to see why, even though it's the rabbi's opinion. Amar Rabba bar Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, kol makom she'ata motzei yachid mekel v'rabim machmirim. Generally, if you see an individual, one opinion, one person's opinion, and he's lenient, and the rabbis are stringent, we always know halacha kerabim. We always hold by the rabbis. So theoretically, we should hold by the rabbis here. However, chutz mizo, this is an exception. Why is this an exception to the rule? Even though the rabbis are stricter here, halakha ke Rabbi Akiva, we hold like Rabbi Akiva, which is in fact what we do. If you hear later on, you just did Shiva for the day. We keep hearing this over and over. Shmuel says, in general, in laws of mourning, we go by the lenient opinion, and therefore we're going to be lenient here. Rav Chanina, we're now going to hear some stories, and we'll see, did people really do this? Bechozai comes up, it actually comes up in a bunch of stories also. I remember there was a story where they were trying to get money from people who had borrowed money from Bechozai. It's very far away. So it was far from the mainland of Babylonia. He heard that his father died in Bechozai. It took a little while for the news to get to him. He went to Rav Chisda to ask him. He said, it's just one day. Rav Natan bar Ami he heard that his mother died in Bechozai. So Rav Natan bar Ami comes before Rava. He tells him same thing, only one day. But in this case, Rav Natan came armed with information. So he asks him, he says, Eitive, but wait, I have a question on what you just said from a Tanaitic source. And you have to wonder why he was asking the rabbi if he already had a Braita that seemed to say, and he knew the answer from the Braita. So he questions him and he says, it says in a Braita that this whole law of Shmuah Rechoka is only if it's one of the five people, your wife, your son, your daughter, your brother, your sister. But Aval alaviv alimo, we're going to see a bunch of distinctions, but if it's one of your parents, because of respect for your parents, shiva shloshim, you have to sit shiva and you have to do shloshim, even if you heard from a long time ago. So basically, Rav Natan says to him, I don't understand. How could you say I don't have shiva and shloshim? According to this Braita, I do. That Braita is an individual's opinion. We don't hold that way. How do I know that? It says in the following Braita, this happened in Israel, and the father of Rabbi Tzadok died in Ginzak, which was somewhere in Madai, they say. I don't know for sure. And he only finds out 3 years later. This is more Holocaust-like, right? Where it could be, it was many years later, instead of 35 days, let's say. Fascinating. Okay, Uskenim Shemo asked Elisha ben Avuya. Remember, this is Acher, who's known to be, right? He went off the derech, and so it's either this happened before. According to another version of this story, it wasn't Elisha ben Avuya, it was someone ben Elisha, and by accident, the words got changed. Some people say, even if you hold, it says Elisha ben Avuya, it must have been a different Elisha ben Avuya because of the chronology. It doesn't make sense he would be there, and that maybe it's not the Elisha ben Avuya who's famous. So we're going to put the whole Elisha ben Avuya issue aside right now, but it's just an interesting thing in of itself, whether this was or not. But in any case, the point is that this was one person's opinion. Okay, they went to this person, whoever it was, and Amru Nahog Shiva Shloshim. And he said, do Shiva and Shloshim. So comes Rava and says that was just his opinion and not the general opinion. And yes, Elisha ben Avuya does come up in the Gemara. We have not encountered it in this cycle yet, but he will come up in the Gemara. Okay, next. When his brother died in the Gola, again, he was in Israel, his brother died abroad, he didn't hear about it, his son, Yashav alav Shiva Shloshim. Here, this isn't even for a parent. And it said he did Shiva and Shloshim. Okay, now, the Gemara is going to question Rabbi Yechia. You held Shiva and Shloshim for your son when he died, and you only heard about it later? This doesn't make any sense. Ini. Is that really true? Aha, Rav, Baruch Ada Rabbi Chia, Dahu Bar Achte de Rabbi Chia. I'm not going to get into the chronology, but basically, in a nutshell, Rav was the nephew of Rabbi Chia from both sides. What does that mean? Rabbi Chia was the product of a second marriage, and from his father from a different marriage had a son called Aivu. His mother had from a different marriage a daughter. So he had a half brother and a half sister who weren't related to each other. They married each other, okay, and they gave birth to Rav. So Rav was his nephew from both sides. So here's a famous story. Kislik lahatam, when Rav went up to Eretz Israel. Now we know Rav used to live in Israel. He then moves to Babylonia, and when I guess he went to visit. So he gets to Eretz Israel, and what's Rabbi Chia first going to ask him, right? How are your parents doing? He doesn't say, how are your parents doing? He says, Amar le, Abba Kayam. He says, is your father still alive? Father was not alive anymore. But Rav, I guess, is having issues saying the words. Maybe he didn't want to start crying. I don't know. He doesn't want to say it. Maybe he doesn't want to, we always talk about this Lashon Sagina, who are euphemisms. He doesn't want to say anything. So Amarle, Ima Kayemet, he said, why didn't you ask, is my mother alive? My mother's your sister as well. So why didn't you ask, is my mother alive? Amarle. So of course, what does he say to him? Ima Kayemet. To which Rav responds, Amarle, Abba Kayam, why didn't you ask if my father's alive? Okay, he was basically avoiding the question, at which point Rabbi Chia understands they obviously both died. Amarle l'shame, he says to his shamash, his servant, halot, or the person who served him, halot li bin alai, take off my shoes, v'holech acharai kelai lebeit hamerchatz, and take my stuff to the bathhouse. But this is strange. Why is he going to the bathhouse? He's going to be an Avel, you're not allowed to go to the bathhouse. So, shmami natzlat, we can infer three things from this story, right? Famous line. We always like to infer things in threes. We can learn three things from this story. Shmamina, avel asor b'nilata sandal. You learn from here that when you're in avelut, you have to take off your shoes. Now, everybody knows this, so it's a little bit of a strange thing to be learning. But what they say is that when you're doing shmuah rechoka, you might have thought the avelut has a different nature. The point is, the same laws apply. You have to take off your shoes as well when you've heard, from after a while. Number two. What do you learn from here? It's only one day. That's why he said, get my stuff ready for the bathhouse, because my point is he wanted to make a big show and say, I want everyone to know this halacha. Maybe it doesn't happen so often. So he wanted to make, right? You imagine also in those days, many people did live near their family generally, right? It's not like nowadays where people have kids across the globe. Wasn't so common in those days. And generally you wouldn't end up in a situation like this. So we wanted to teach everyone that when you have the Shmuah Rechoka, you just do Avelut for one day. Now you have to say, well, why was he going to the bathhouse though? He's not going to go to the bathhouse at night. If Shiva's one day, he's going to go the next day. So why do you have him take his kelim? What do you see here? Even part of the day. So Shmuah Rechoka ends up, you sit Shiva just for a short while, because we hold also, like we said before, like with Shiva in general, a little bit of the day is sufficient to cover as if it was a full day. So that's why he says, take off my shoes, but bring me my stuff because soon I'm going to go to the bathhouse because soon my Shiva is going to be over. So now, how did we get to this? Remember, we started with Rabbi Achya in the Gola. His brother died, and he did Shiva and Shloshim. And then they bring this story and they say, but look, Rabbi Chia for his brother and sister didn't. So why did Rabbi Achia do Shiva and Shloshim? So the answer, great Gemara answer, Rabbi Chia l'chud, Rabbi Achia l'chud. They each held different things. You can question Rabbi Achia from something Rabbi Achia did maybe, but you can't question him from something Rabbi Chia did. Two different people, two different opinions, which fits in with our theme in general in Gemara, and particularly in today's daf, where we see all these different customs. Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Avin, Shama Shmuah Krova Beregel. This is a classic question. I feel like when I was teaching in high school, my students might have thought to ask this question. They always like asking, what if? Let's say you hear Shmuah Krova on the Regel, meaning the Regel came out on day 29, okay, of your 30-day month. So you hear while it's on the holiday that someone died, but you can't start sitting Shiva because it's the holiday. Once the holiday is over, it's already beyond the 30 days. So now, what did they say? It's Shmuah Rechoka. Even though this is right, it's not about when you heard, it's when you start the Avelut. So if you're only going to start the Avelut 30 days after, then it's not relevant. Then it's basically a Shmuah Rechoka. Okay, even though you actually heard, you would have thought Shmuah Rechoka depends on when you hear. Now we're going to see, no, if you couldn't sit Shiva that day, then it doesn't count. And not only on a holiday, but we're going to see the same thing about Shabbat. Tani Rabbi Ada de Min Kesari Kameh de Rabbi Yochanan. He brought a braita that says, Shama Shmuah Krova b'Shabbat, even on Shabbat. Now, why would Shabbat you would think might be different? Because remember, you can be noheg dinei avelut b'tzin'ah. Things in your own house, right? You keep the laws of avelut privately, just not publicly. So now they say, Eino noheg ela yom echad. Okay, so if Motzei Shabbat becomes rechoka, it's only one day. So the same thing, if Shabbat was day 29 and then 30 already is the next day, then it doesn't count. Now, Becky, to your question, korea, no korea, do you tear kriya or not when you hear from far away? So you're not going to like the answer because you're not going to get an answer. Rabbi Meni Omer, no korea. Rabbi Chanina Amar korea. Okay, machloket, yes, no. Okay. I'll give you a little hint though. There is a dalid next to Eino Korea. Usually when there's a little dalid, that sends you to the halacha. And that's usually they put the dalid, right, sends you where you can find the halacha. So first of all, you can look in the Amish Patnei Mitzvah, it'll tell you where you can find it. But number two, that is an indicator that we hold that you don't tear kriya. So Amar le Rabbi Mani le Rabbi Chia, and you'll see that the sugya prefers this opinion. So Rabbi Mani says to Rabbi Chanina, Bishlama le didi da'amina Eino Korea. My opinion makes a lot more sense. Because there's no shiva. He assumes shiva that kriya, tearing, is integrally connected to sitting shiva. So and for 7 days. Since you have shiva, therefore you have kriya. Is there ever such a thing as kriya without having shiva? Okay, he doesn't exactly prove this, but he just claims there isn't. To which the Gemara says, I don't know what your problem, what your issue is. I can show you. Velo. Velo, is it not true? Vahatanya, isi avua de Rabbi Zera. Isi, the father of Rabbi Zera, brought this braita. Now we're going to have a story. First, we're going to have somebody brings a braita. It's either his father or Amrela Achua de Rabbi Zera. Some people say it was Rabbi Zera's brother. Either which way, one of them brings a braita, Kamei de Rabbi Zera, and we'll see Rabbi Zera's reaction to the braita. That's what's going to be important. Misha ein lo chaluk likra. Someone, let's say you don't have anything that you can tear. And then during the Shiva week, you end up with something that you can tear. I don't know exactly what the situation is that you don't have something to tear, but you don't have anything to tear. Generally, also people wear something underneath. So maybe you have nothing underneath and you have only that, and it's going to be inappropriate to walk around with your body exposed. So if you don't have, let's say, a second, right, like the person who didn't have any clothes to launder, right, he had to launder, he only had one thing to wear. So maybe something like that. If you don't have anything to rip, and then during the week, you end up with something to tear. Korea, then you tear it in the middle of the week. La'achar Shiva, eno Korea. But after Shiva, you don't tear it. That was the braita he brought. Ani Rabbi Zera Batre, when this person, either his brother or his father, brought the braita, Rabbi Zera said to him, Bamed dvarim amurim, he said, wait, but that's only b'chamisha mitei mitzvah. That's only brother, sister, wife, son, and daughter. Aval alaviv alimo, Korea v'holech. But you can tear Shiva, you can tear Kriya for your parent at any time. Let's say you don't even have during the week of Shiva. You can tear after. So what do you see here? Shiva and Kriya are not integrally connected. So there's your answer to Rabbi Meni. To which the Gemara says, no, it's not a good answer. Katan yahi lichvod avivi imo. Here comes a very important concept, which we're going to see also throughout the daf now, which is there's laws of avelut, and then there's laws of respect. That's a different issue. There's respect for your parents. Out of respect for your parents, which you don't have for your other relatives, out of respect for your parents, if you didn't manage to tear Kriya in the beginning, right, you can tear it later, even if there's no Shiva. So basically, they say here, that showed, but that's not the laws of Kriya. That's laws of Kibud Ava'im. That's something else. The fact that in this source, it says that you could tear Kriya later, even in the middle of Shiva, even after Shiva. That's only for a parent, and it's a totally separate law. That's not the law of Kriya. The law of Kriya is integrally connected to the Shiva, and that's why you actually don't tear Kriya for Shmuar Rechoka. I didn't look up halacha l'maaseh, but the fact that it appears with a note there, I assume that means that that's the case. Tanu Rabbanan. Kol ha'amor b'parashat kohanim shekohen mitameh lahen, avel mitabel alehem. Now we're going to get the list of who you sit Shiva for, and what's the source of that list? It's whoever a Kohen. Remember, a Kohen can't become Tameh Lamet. However, it can't be impure to a dead body, except for 7 people. Who are those 7 people? It's the exact, from those 7 people, we're going to get who an Avel sits Shiva for. However, we're going to add a little bit to the list. Ve'eluhen, these are the people. Ishto, his wife. Aviv ve'imo, father, mother. Achiv achoto, brother and sister. Now, I should say 2 things about the brother and sister. Number 1, it's only brother and sister who share the same father. And it's only a sister who hasn't been married yet. Bino ubito, and son and daughter. Hosifu alehen, but in addition, they added achiv achotah b'tula me'imo, brother and sister who's never been married from the mother's side as well, and achoto nisua be'ma'aviv be'mimo, and any sister, whether mother or father, right? They share the same mother or father. Even when she's married, you also sit Shiva for her. So those were added to the list of the Kohanim. This is fascinating now. Okay, you're going to see something that, again, we do not do anymore, but you're going to see a 3-way machloket, and we don't hold by anybody here. Shem shemitabel alehem, kach mitabel al shniyim shelahem, divrei Rabbi Akiva. Just like you sit shiva for these 7 people, you also sit shiva for who? Anyone they sit shiva for, you sit shiva for as well. Okay, so if your son is sitting shiva for his son, you're going to sit shiva as well. Okay, even though that's not one of the lists, right? Grandchild isn't on the list. I see you to your writing. I should be very clear about it. There's the list for the Kohanim. The Kohen can become impure to these people. The additions are only for mourners, not for the Kohen. The Kohen cannot be, right? The Kohen only has those 7 people, not the sister who's married, right? Not the sister or brother from the mother's side. The added to the list is only added for the mourners, just to be very clear. Okay, mourners mourn for those people, sit shiva for those people. And a Kohen will sit shiva for those people, but a Kohen won't be able to go to the cemetery for those people. So it was a sore point in my family coming from Kohanim, and I'm the only sister. So I always feel like, you're sort of on the outs. Your brothers can't become a tamid. Okay, anyway, but they do sit shiva. Now, a nice morbid thought on a birthday. So we see here, if any of those people are sitting shiva, you sit shiva with them. Okay, you sit shiva also, not with them. You just sit shiva. Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Eino metabel ela ben beno v'alav v'aviv. No, it only goes grandson and grandfather. Okay, not to the side, like someone sitting shiva for his wife. So you're supposed to sit shiva for your brother who's sitting shiva for his wife. That wouldn't be. V'chachamim omrim, kol shemitabel alav mitabel imo. Anyone who you sit shiva for, you sit shiva with him. Okay, so the Gemara says, Chachamim anu Tanakama, that was the same as the first opinion, right? And these are 3 different opinions. What it means, imo, with him, means if that person and you're with them in the house, you go pay a shiva call to your brother who's sitting shiva for someone, right? Remember the story of Shmuel, who went to his brother's shiva and he started complaining to him, right? And then so let's say, according to that story, when Shmuel was there, he should be sitting on the floor with him as well. Okay, we don't do this, but that's what it's saying here. As opposed to when you go home, though, you're not sitting shiva. You're only sitting shiva when you're in their presence. Now, this whole law is actually, why don't we do this nowadays? So the Rama, I think it's the Rama who writes, this is all a law of respect. It goes again to the kavod of your relatives. So nowadays, people are mochel al kvodam. They don't care. Like, it wouldn't be awkward if someone's sitting shiva in your family and you're not sitting shiva with them. Like, it just, this kind of thing that changed over time, because it's just really customary out of respect. That's why, right? You don't really need to sit shiva for them. It's just out of respect. So because of that, it kind of fell to the wayside at a certain point. So now we're going to see, how do we know it's when you're with him in the house? Rabbi Chia said to his son, he also said to his son, when your wife is sitting shiva and you're with her, you should sit on the floor with her, do other things of avelut with her. But below apa, when you're not with her, lo tinhog aveluta. You don't have to do avelut if you're not with her. Mar Ukva, shchivle bar chamua, his son of his father-in-law, which basically means his wife's brother died. He thought he's supposed to do shiva and shloshim. Remember, he was the exilarch. Al Rav Huna legabe, Rav Huna comes in. Eshkache, he sees him sitting shiva with them. Great response. Amar le, Sudaniyata bayit lemecha. What, you wanted to eat the Sudat Havra'ah because the Sudat Havra'ah is only for the Avelim. What, you wanted free food? Is that why you're sitting shiva with them? I don't get it. Lo amru lichvod ishto ela chami b'chamoto. When they said out of respect for your wife, they only meant when her mother or father dies, not when her brother dies. Basically says you should not be sitting shiva with her. Titania, how do we know this? It says in a braita, Mishamei lo chami b'chamoto. Your mother or father-in-law dies. A bunch of laws here. You can't force your wife to wear makeup. You turn your bed over and you do avelut with her. Here you see, for a father-in-law or mother-in-law. Likewise, she. If her mother-in-law or father-in-law dies, she can't start putting makeup on. She turns over her bed and she does avelut with him. There's a different braita though that says, even though they say you can't force your wife to put makeup on, in truth they said, she can, even though she's sitting shiva, she pours a cup for him. That means she gets his wine ready. She sets up his bed, which means you don't turn over the bed. and she washes his hands, feet, and legs. Okay, nowadays you wouldn't do this, but he can make his own bed and he can wash his own hands, feet, and face. But okay. But in any case, Kashina Adade, it seems here she's not keeping laws of Avelut. So how do you explain that? Here he proves it. Since we have these two contradictory brightot, one must be referring to mother and father-in-law, as it said explicitly, and the other one must be referring to someone else. Okay. And yes, good to point out, Ruth, that these are the classic things a wife is supposed to do for one's husband in general. And in those days, that was commonplace. Okay, last line for today. Amemar, Shchivle Barbere, his grandson died. Kara Ilave, he tears Kriya, okay, even though we'll see in a minute, he really wasn't supposed to yet. Atabire, when his son shows up, he realizes, oh, now I'm supposed to tear Kriya when my son shows up. Kara Bape, so he tears Kriya in front of the son, because it was to show his, right, that's the whole idea, to show respect for he was sitting Shiva. But all of a sudden, right, he obviously forgot a bunch of things. Itkar, he remembers, Dimiyushav Karadi, he did it while he was sitting. Kam Kara Me'umad, and he realizes he's supposed to do it standing up, which we'll get to tomorrow, why that is. So then he tears a third time while he was standing. So Amarle Ravashi, the Amar Meimar, Rashi says to him, Kriya de Me'umad Minana. Where do we get it from? And we're going to see this tomorrow. I don't want to start because I don't want you to think that this is the source. We're going to see this isn't exactly the source. They're going to try to learn it from Eov. In the end, they'll learn it from somewhere else. With that, we will finish today's daf. Have a chodesh tov, everyone. And thank you for the dedication.